from now on just say KRCC, brings together governments whose members collaborate on regional transportation and land use decisions. These governments include Kitsap County, cities within our county, the ports, Squamish Tribe, the Muckleshoot Tribe, and also Kitsap Transit. Hopefully I didn't leave anyone out on that list. When we were at our last reception, legislative reception, in the fall of 19, I don't think any of us managed or even thought that we would imagine that we would be in a situation like we are right now in this past year. In fact, last year, I'd never even heard of Zoom. And but here we are today, and most of us, I think, are probably engaged with Zoom 4 or 5 times a day. So these events, pandemic including, will continue to have impacts on our community. At the same time, there are challenges beyond the pandemic and the events that we all know too well from 2020. So we have to consider this as a region, that we're doing this together. And I underline this word in my notes: collaboration is the key. Collaboration is the key. I said that earlier with the legislative orientation. And I think, I know, we in Kitsap County do this very well. That is the collaboration. With this collaboration in mind, tonight we're joined by U.S. Representative Derek Kilmer, some of our state legislators, and I think we'll get a better reading of who's here in a minute. And we'll be asking these questions on issues that are important not just to KRCC, but are important to our entire region. Does someone have something on, like a phone or something? Okay. These issues include the budget impacts of COVID-19. They include affordable housing and homelessness, transportation funding, social justice, racial equity, inclusion, and climate change and resilience. And I'm sure I know these topics will come up tonight because we have questions that address those topics. What we want to see tonight, we're hoping we'll see tonight, we want to see where the state and federal governments can work together with local governments on all the issues I just raised and support the people, and not just the people of Kitsap County, but the environment of Kitsap County. These aren't easy tasks, and at the same time, we have this excellent leadership. I had a hard time choosing that word. I started out with good leadership. We have excellent leadership in this county, and I say that without reservation. People who work together and know how to dialogue. Do we agree all the time? I don't think so. But for the most part, we get the job done, the legislators and all of us together in Kitsap County. So each of the panelists tonight are examples of this leadership style, I believe, collaboration style, and I'd like to introduce them now. I'm not sure who's here, but I can go down the list that I see Michelle just jumped on. And I'll go down the list. Congressman Derek Kilmer. He's been a U.S. representative for us, 6th district since 2013, I think it was. I get a little tongue-tied because the first time I met Congressman Kilmer was doing one of his house runs, state house runs. And I'm really dating myself and dating Congressman Kilmer also. I don't know how long ago that was, but we'll have to ask him that. Then we have State Senator Christine Rolfes. She's represented the 23rd since 2011. I believe Christine is here. We have joining us State Senator Emily Randall, who was elected in 2018 to represent the 26th district. And I believe we have Washington State Representative Drew Hansen. He's been representing the 23rd since 2011. And finally, we have Representative Jesse Young. He's represented the 26th since 2014.
And Commissioner Wolf, Jesse Young, Representative Young, has not arrived yet.
Okay, all right. Well, that means we'll wait for him. And if he's not able to make it for some reason, we'll have more time. So let me begin by giving, and I didn't know what this word meant, but Sophie and KRCC told me there's a chairman's prerogative.
And of course, along with all of our folks that are on the list, we also have Representative Appleton.
We do. We do. Not a panelist, but no one can replace Sherry. Well, someone will replace Sherry, but Sherry, welcome. As I said earlier, it's good to hear your voice, and wish you Godspeed.
Thank you.
In the future, whatever you're going to do. Thanks, Rob, for that. So let me give, what is it called again? The commissioners, my prerogative. I'm going to give Representative Kilmer the opportunity to say a few opening remarks. Given our time limit, we're going to ask everyone later on with the questions. Please go to 2 to 3 minutes at the most. We're going to give Congressman Kilmer 2 minutes, and I've never been in a position where I had to cut off a congressman, but I'm going to do it, Derek.
We're not going to start now. I'm going to keep
2 minutes.
I'll keep it really brief. So the order of the day is one, to get a COVID relief bill passed. Negotiations are underway between the U.S. House and the U.S. Senate, and I think the interests are aligned. Whether we're able to actually see something move forward remains to be seen, but it's really important. First and foremost, to save lives, to crush this virus, to make sure there's adequate testing, contact tracing, treatment, so that we get a handle on this virus. And then secondly, not just to protect lives, but to protect livelihoods. You all know we've seen the outcome of this on small businesses, on families. And so that is the order of the day. That is priority one. And my hope is that I'll be heading back to DC on Sunday. My hope is that you'll see some action in the lame duck. Congress also has to pass a spending bill before December the 11th to avert a government shutdown. The Senate finally today came out with its spending bills, and negotiations will start this week. So those are the two big things happening at the federal level, both of which hopefully will be resolved before the holidays.
Thank you, Congressman Kilmer. We're there. We're happy, very happy you're glad there. You're there working on those for us. Thank you. So let me move on to our main legislative panel. The board,
Can we
the
see
care.
them? Can
Sorry,
we see them?
We're going to put them up, Sherry. Should be up. You're
So I
talking about the panel?
I think Representative Appleton is hoping that we can take down the presentation slides and instead just have the dialogue. And so perhaps a compromise, we can have this up for just a minute. And then I can stop sharing. I don't know, Commissioner Wolf, it's your prerogative.
Sherry, Representative Appleton, will that be all right with you?
It hasn't changed.
I think she said yes.
And
Sorry,
Commissioner-
I did.
sorry,
Yes.
sorry, head shake. Okay, let's do that. So
Okay,
leave
and
them up-
Commissioner
leave them
Wolf,
up
sorry,
first.
while I'm interrupting, I just note from the public record standpoint, I need to verbally announce that we are recording this meeting. We mentioned it in
okay.
writing, but
Great.
sorry for the interruption. Go ahead.
No problem at all. Let's get back to the legislative panel and the questions. So the KRCC board put together 5 questions. They're on the screen. Here's the first question. Each panelist, as I said earlier, we have 2 to 3 minutes answer the question. So let's talk about the first issue first, the budget question. It's obviously budget season, and many jurisdictions are facing difficult times and cuts as a result of the economic downturn, principally caused by COVID-19. Question on the screen: what are the ways the state and federal governments can support local jurisdictions that are facing budget crisis as a result of COVID-19? So if we could leave it up just for a few seconds and then move on with that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask, I'm going to go not in alphabetical order, but I'm going to go in the order of starting with Congressman Kilmer and working down the Senate and the House. So I'd like to start with Congressman Kilmer, if you would be so kind as to address that question. I can read it again or put it back up on the screen, and your choice.
No, I got the gist of it. Listen, this is really important. And I should have said this out at the beginning. You know, the reality is all of the partners on this screen in local government are really on the front lines of combating this pandemic. And the federal government needs to have your back. In the absence of federal support, we're going to see state and local workers laid off. We've already seen nationwide more than 1 million public sector employees laid off. And if you look at who local governments employ all over this country, it's some of the folks who we need the most now: our firefighters, our police officers, in many areas, public hospital and healthcare workers, and teachers, and unfortunately, without federal intervention, they're at risk of layoffs.
Mhm.
I know, Commissioner, the National Association of Counties said that counties nationwide expect about a $30 billion increase in expenditures from the pandemic through next fiscal year. Cities are expecting very substantial shortfalls. And so that is why the CARES Act provided some resources in that regard. The HEROES Act, which passed out of the House in May and then was passed again in September, or excuse me, in October, provided assistance to state and local governments. It used the kind of modified CDBG allocation. Importantly, it also it provided more flexibility around the use of the CARES Act money and an extension for the use of the CARES Act money. But I think it's really important that this gets done. As you have followed, this has been one of the hangups in an agreement, in that you've heard, and I don't say this in a partisan way, you've heard the president say, well, we don't want to bail out blue states and blue cities. This is not about bailing out anybody. It's about acknowledging that our local communities are on the front lines. And in the absence, as you heard the chair of the Federal Reserve say, in the absence of federal investment, it will lead to very substantial layoffs, and it will prolong this recession or potentially put us into a depression.
Thank you, Congressman Kilmer. Next, let me jump over to Senator Randall and then Senator Rolfes, if we could. Should we put the question back up, or should I read it? Or
It's okay. I've got it in front of me.
okay.
Thank you. So, as someone who wasn't in the legislature, but has learned a lot from, looking back at what happened after the last recession, I will say that my goal, first and foremost, is to advocate against the extreme cuts and austerity budget that was passed, back after the last Great Recession. I know that from legislators, who were serving then, that it felt like the right choice to pass a more conservative budget. But what we've seen over the years is that ended up costing us more in the long run, in the number of folks who lost their benefits and safety net, and the impact on our local jurisdictions and agencies. And so I think one of the ways that we can best support our local partners is by ensuring that the people of Washington have the tools that they need to build out of this situation that we're in, to build strong lives for themselves and their communities. I'm looking hopefully to our partners, Congressman Kilmer and his colleagues at the federal level, to inject the needed funds into our state and local jurisdictions as well. But on my end, I'm looking out for extending healthcare coverage to folks who are in that gap, to making sure that folks are able to rely on housing subsidies and the tools that they need to really keep themselves from falling deeper into a hole. That is what is going to keep our community strong, and that's what I'm excited to continue advocating for with my great partners in Olympia. And you'll hear next from Senator Rolfes, who we are so lucky to have in our county here, advocating for the people of Washington, and especially the folks here in Kitsap.
Thank you, Senator Randall. Senator Rolfes.
Hi, everybody. So I think that folks on this Zoom call know I'm currently the chair of the Senate's Budget Committee and expect to still be serving in that role next year. But we haven't formally been elected to our positions yet, so we'll find out. So I have to be very careful what I say so that Emily still votes for me. I think what you guys know, and what I've been pretty consistent about saying over the last 8 months, is that the state government doesn't print money, the federal government does. Congressman Kilmer knows how much the states need support from Congress for CARES Act, to respond to COVID and the economic challenges. When we do our state budget, we do a 4-year balanced budget. That's the approach that we take. We are currently, based on numbers, based on the forecasts that we have, we're balanced through June. So that's good news. We're about $4 billion in the hole over the next 4-year cycle. So that is not an insurmountable challenge if you address it in year one. If you address it in year one, it's a $1 billion problem, and then you've got your problem solved because that equals 4 billion over 4 years. So like Senator Randall, I'm looking for a balanced approach. It needs to be something that the voters will sustain, whether it's taxes or cuts. It needs to be sustainable. I was in the legislature during the recession, and we did actually pass a bundle of taxes to have a balanced approach, and the voters rescinded many of them, which called us into a special session, at which point we had to cut schools in the middle of the school year. So the balanced approach needs to be something the public will support, and then we'll be able to take it from there. In terms of helping you guys, we can't bail you out, but as Senator Randall said, the more support we can provide, the more we can keep our safety net intact, the less pressure that will be on you all. And I think that's the approach that we'll be taking, is just how do we sustain, how do we keep the safety net we have, and how do we make sure we're catching more people as more people are falling.
Thank you, Senator Alvis.
Yep.
Welcome, Representative Caldeir.
Well, hello, everyone, and thank you so much for hosting this event. It's always a wonderful event every year. It's too bad we can't meet in person, but it's it's the times this year. So, I serve on appropriations, and one of the things with our recent budget forecast is that they have both a pessimistic and an optimistic forecast. And usually those are pretty close, but because there are so many uncertainties with our state and our state budget, and how many people are going to be on our caseloads, this is like the widest gap that we've seen. And so one of the things that I want to do is I want to help the businesses that are for the industries that are truly are suffering worse than others. I think COVID hit certain industries worse than others. I think that the technology industry has actually done really well. Amazon's done really well. I know. I think I just got an Amazon delivery right now. But there's other industries like our hospitality industry, and many other businesses that are really suffering. And this is I've served 6 years now. And one of the nice things is that as, the entire time that I've served, every year we have had more revenue because our economy has grown and has recovered from the recession. So one of the things that I worry about is if we put too many taxes onto businesses and people, that we may wind up causing more problems with our economy than if we try to make investments. And I would like to see things to help support the industries that have been hit worse than others. So these are going to be very complicated and very interesting discussions moving forward, because I think that for the House, most of ours is going to be remote. I will still be in Olympia, and I will be accessible. All of you guys, even if you are not in my district, feel free to reach out, because as things come down the pike, it will be moving very quickly. But at the same time, the number of bills that we are going to be able to put forward will be limited, because it is going to be far more difficult to get things passed. So, it's a new time, a new frontier, and just please know that my door's always opened. And, I'm going to be focused on trying to work on things to help fix our economy and making it so that we can keep our businesses afloat. So thank you.
Thank you, Representative Caldera. I think we did hear earlier in the legislative orientation that it'll be a complete virtual session.
So that's what they're saying. I will still be down there. I will still take in-person meetings
Sure.
As long as people are wearing masks and
Yeah.
having distance protocols. So
We'll do it differently, all of us, and we'll just find a way to do it. Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you. Representative Hanson. Didn't see Drew, but is he here?
He's here,
there.
yes.
Oh, there. Okay. You're not Drew.
So listen, I'm gonna be real short because everyone said it. The state doesn't have any spare money. So what the state can do to help local governments is nothing. If the federal government comes up with some money, specifically if Mitch McConnell decides that he wants to be a patriot and actually do something that helps the country, then there might be something we can do. But absent that, it's going to be dark and the state's not going to be doing anything. And it's going to be a miracle if we can get out of this session just protecting the major investments we've already made without doing much harm. So that's about it. I don't think there's a lot more complexity to it than that. And thanks for your time.
Thank you, Representative Hanson. Did Representative Young arrive?
He's not with us now.
Okay. Well, let's move on to another question. Affordable housing, homelessness. There are people in Kitsap who are facing tough times. You all know that. We all know that because of COVID-19. It's made this issue even more important. I'd point out before going to the panelists that Kitsap County and Bremerton recently produced a report on the state of affordable housing across Kitsap. As they did that, there were 3 major recommendations. I'm going to read those recommendations. We need to help people stay in affordable housing when they have it. 2, we need to encourage the development of more affordable housing. And lastly, we need to expand housing options, grow housing supply to address existing shortages and future growth. So the question is up on the screen. What are the ways state and federal government can support Kitsap in addressing the shortage of affordable housing in our region? Start out with Congressman Kilmer, please.
Thanks for the question. And listen, we had housing issues before anyone had heard of COVID. Unfortunately, those challenges have been exacerbated by COVID. Not to beat the drum that Drew Hansen just beat, but the House has actually passed a number of bills focused on this that unfortunately haven't seen much action in the Senate. The HEROES Act acknowledged up front that the best way to deal with homelessness is prevented on the front end. And so it included $100 billion in emergency rental assistance to help people pay their rent and stay in their homes. On top of that, there was a bill, a big infrastructure bill that I think I'll also talk about in one of the next questions you'll ask, that passed out of the House called the Moving Forward Act. It was a big infrastructure bill, but it had a broad definition of infrastructure. It wasn't just focused on roads and bridges and transit, but also on things like schools and housing and broadband access. It included $100 billion in investments in affordable housing. That would create, and this gets at the question you asked, it tried to deal with the supply side and acknowledge that we need a whole lot more housing units nationwide, and we need a whole lot more affordable housing units. And that bill would create nearly 2 million of them for that purpose. We also passed a bill to expand very substantially the low-income housing tax credit with incentives for rural communities and for tribal communities, and for investments to support individuals at risk of homelessness. And then we also included a bill that would create a new neighborhood investment tax credit that would subsidize some of the development costs to just encourage the rehabilitation of vacant homes or the construction of new homes in distressed areas. And, put together, I think that type of comprehensive approach is what it's going to take to increase the supply of housing and to make sure that we don't see this continued price pressure that has only been exacerbated by the pandemic.
Thank you, Congressman Kilmer. Senator Randall.
Thank you. So until just a couple weeks ago, I was one of only 3 renters in the Senate. I closed on my first home with the help of an FHA loan and Washington State's first-time homebuyers program. And prior to that, I had moved 17 times since graduating from college. And, you know, I know that my story is not unique among renters, both in our county and across the state. The challenges, as Congressman Comer said, of housing affordability were here long before we entered this pandemic, and our neighbors have been struggling to find and maintain affordable housing and to you know, keep their families housed. We've made some incredible strides in the state over this last biennium, making unprecedented investments in our low-income housing trust fund to ensure that members in our neighbors have opportunities. And you know, we were able to invest in a program with Kitsap Mental Health to create permanent supported housing, which is so important and one piece of the puzzle that you know hasn't gotten enough attention until recently. We also need to ensure that our renters are able to find and maintain that affordable housing. I know so many folks who have had to take advantage of the rental assistance programs that Kitsap County and Bremerton and Pierce County too have invested in with the help of those CARES dollars and state funds. We're going to need to be doing more of that, to look at how we can use our dollars wisely to ensure that small landlords are able to continue offering affordable housing to our neighbors and that our neighbors can continue to afford it. I think creating more pathways as we can expand programs to affordable home ownership are also really key to unclogging that pipeline of of the demand of affordable rent, you know, so that folks can get into their first homes and we can free up the limited apartment space and rental units while we can also focus on constructing more. I look forward to, you know, strengthening the investments, capital investments that we've made in that low-income housing trust fund with any money that we can find under rocks, you know, and if we are able to get those injections of federal dollars, then I think we have built a really strong scaffolding and have great programs administered by Commerce and some of our local agency partners that we can keep investing in. But it's a problem that took a long time to get to this point and that is going to take a while for us to really fix.
Thank you, Senator Randall. Senator Rolfes.
Thank you. Are you timing us?
Loosely.
Because where I just got off the campaign trail where like you had 60 seconds and so 2 minutes is like, wow, I could write a whole dissertation in 2 minutes.
No one's going to cut you off, Senator Rolfes. Go ahead.
Couple of things. First, and so Emily sounds like she has to go first every time. So I think we're all going to be building off of each other unless you shuffle us up, Ed. But rental assistance was a need. It's like a bottomless buck. How do you say that? It's we've been needing help with rental assistance in the state forever. We have never funded it well enough. And then the pandemic just exacerbated the problem. And fortunately, with the CARES Act dollars, not just the money that we sent to local governments, but we were able to put a significant investment, I think at least $100 million recently into rental assistance. So that's going to continue to be something that I think a lot of us think is an effective way to keep people in their houses. Similarly, diversion assistance is something we just started funding. And that is the funds that somebody might need to stay in their home so they don't become homeless, like help with a medical bill, help with a car repair, that kind of thing. That's different from rent, but it's the same outcome of letting somebody stay another month or two where they're living. So those are kind of the two big, I think, funding places that will continue to have interest in the legislature. On a local level, I want to throw out some bills that I worked on last year that I'm hoping will be part of a affordable housing package and hope that you guys will help me with them this time around. Not that you didn't help me the first time, but they were new ideas last year. One is getting rid of the limits on occupants, on unrelated occupants that can be in a home. Not a big problem in Kitsap County, but if you think of our I think it's called Compassion, Homes with Compassion. It's that new concept locally where 4 or 5 people who are unrelated are living in a house that the nonprofit is renting. That would be illegal in Bellingham, Pullman, Medina. There are a lot of jurisdictions around the state have limits on the number of people who are not related who can live together. And that just all right out there is a blow to affordable housing and kind of creative solutions that a lot of us had. Like Emily, I think a lot of us were renters when we were younger. I lived in houses with multiple unmarried people until I got married, actually. So imagine that that's not allowed, and you've taken away a huge swath of affordable housing. I also think we're going to be seeing the need for mall redevelopment, shopping mall redevelopment across America. And I don't know what kind of incentives that we need to help local governments redevelop those so that they're not eyesores and essentially suburban and urban blight. But the kind of changes that they're making at some malls around the country where we're mixing office space and residential space in retail space, I think that's something that there's a lot of opportunity there. And think of the Kitsap Mall. Is there something that local government and the state can partner on to help the Kitsap Mall redevelop into a more vibrant community asset? Similarly, I had the bill on the limits of occupants. I also have another bill I'm reintroducing that would allow school districts to use excess property with approval of the school board and the local voters if necessary for affordable housing for school staff. That is something that rural and small districts are allowed to do, and I'd like to see that expanded so that all districts have that ability. And off the top of my head, Bainbridge is behind that. They have a coalition, but the CK school district also has extra land that that they may be able to redevelop at some point in the future. And then finally, I think the state and especially Kitsap County need a lot more low-income senior housing. There's nowhere, or not even necessarily low income, but low rent, affordable rent. There's nowhere for people to downsize to in Kitsap County. And so you have people living in houses that would prefer to not stay in their large home, but they don't have an alternative place that they'd like to live. And so I think that kind of, I think those kind of developments are something we might want to start taking a look at. So those are my ideas, and I'm happy to work on priorities that you guys bring to us as well.
Thank you, Senator Rolfes. I would just point out that the county commissioners last week approved funding 1/10% mental health tax for Homes for Compassion last week. You raised that, so I'll bring that up. Representative Caldeira, please.
Thank you. And yes, I am also very supportive of rental assistance. However, the reality of it is that I don't think that we're ever going to be able to voucher our way out of the rising housing costs. One of the problems is that we're not keeping up with the demand of people moving into our state. And one of the things that I would like to see fixed is some of the problems that we currently have with the Growth Management Act. And you can take a look at the city of Bremerton and the city of Port Orchard boundary lines, and there's a reason as to why certain areas within the urban growth area have not been annexed. And for those areas, the county obviously is not going to pay for the improvements because, you know, you guys are struggling for money too. So one of the things that I would like to see is a little bit more flexibility so that the cities are able to annex and there is better options for people to build to meet the rising demands that we have in our state for housing. Another thing is that until that capacity has increased, one of the things that I've been working on is the shared housing programs, where Like, for example, I've got a couple extra rooms in my home, and I could voluntarily allow somebody to come who's on the verge of homelessness to come and either rent or work to, to pay for the ability to stay in my home. And the cost per person is only around $1,000 to match people. So I put a bill last year to allow these shared housing programs to compete for the state dollars that we have for housing. I was quite blown away as to how many of the housing programs fought me on that, because the cost per person is so low that they were worried that they would get some of the grant money. So I personally think that it's been a very wonderful solution for many people, and I think that that's something that we should allow is for them to compete for the grant dollars as well as the other ones, other programs. So I'm going to continue to fight for that. But and also work to fix some of the problems that we have within our Growth Management Act. So thank you.
Thank you, Representative Caldeira. And last on the panel on this question, Representative Hansen. Drew.
So probably the biggest thing we do at the state level is the Housing Trust Fund. The good news is that's in the capital budget and not the operating budget. So the fact that the state is in the red will hopefully not affect that. And so I anticipate we will actually see a capital budget. You may see us do some work around renter protections. We've done various things over the years. In fact, one of the more popular things we did, at least for people who came to visit from the district, was related to how much notice tenants need to get before various actions are taken. So I think it's probably plausible we do some more work on that. But I think at the state level, those are probably two of the bigger ones.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Drew. Okay, moving on to the next question. We talked about the budget earlier, and it's important when we think about funding transportation projects. Obviously, I'm moving into transportation projects. This past year, Kitsap participated in a countywide and regional competition for federal surface transportation program funding. You can see that on the screen. Federal, you can read that as well as I can. Federal surface transportation program funding for transportation projects. Every year it becomes increasingly apparent that the STP funding is not adequate to address the growing transportation needs in the county, and we all know that. In terms of other sources of transportation funding, gas tax revenue is steadily decreasing. Furthermore, the state distributes gas tax revenue by population, but population numbers have not been adjusted since 2005, 2006. There's a question. What are some ways? Let's start with, we'll go back to, I should say, Congressman Kilmer, please.
This is a really big deal. The reality is investing in infrastructure can be a winner, both to solve problems with American infrastructure and to get people back to work at a time where our economy really needs it. Even prior to the pandemic, the American Society of Civil Engineers graded out American infrastructure as a plus. If my daughter got a D+ on their report card, it would be a problem. And so my sincere hope is that you see Congress take action on an infrastructure bill. The House has already. You've heard the Biden administration say, the President-elect Biden say that this would be a priority for him and for his administration. My hope is it's in the broad parameters that the House's infrastructure bill was. That bill included more than $300 billion for investments in roads and bridges, with a focus on fixing what we got, including a whole bunch of structurally deficient bridges. It included more than $100 billion in transit funding, and I saw John Clausen on here to focus on bus zero emission buses and adding new routes and enabling more reliable service. and investments to reduce gridlock and fix bottlenecks and deal with resiliency issues. You look at in Kitsap County, we have a really big one with the challenges at Gore. Not just a bottleneck, but a real resiliency concern, and one that I know many of us on this Zoom are invested in fixing. Just say one other thing, what I just spoke to was primarily in the funding lever. There's also the financing lever. There are financing tools that can be provided to state and local governments, things like Build America bonds and advance refunding bonds and other types of private activity bonds. Those were all included in that Moving Forward Act. Expanding the new market tax credit was also in that. And there were also some changes to provide parity for tribal communities when tribal communities were looking at issuing bonds and making these types of investments, and even making sure that there was the ability of tribal projects to take advantage of the new market tax credit and those sorts of programs. All of that is in legislation that's passed out of the House already. My hope is that that will be a early priority in the new year.
Thank you, Congressman Kilmer. Let me, Senator Rolfe, as you said, you want to shuffle this up a little. I'm going to go to Senator Randall, and then, no, I'm not. I'm going to go to you, Senator Rolfe, and then I'm going to come back to Senator Randall, just for this one time.
By shuffle, I meant like start with Drew.
Okay.
And then go to Michelle. Just this one time, I heard what Representative Kilmer said about Gorst, and that's clearly a priority for Kitsap County. In the 23rd legislative district for transportation, it's going to be ferry system all over again. We're going to be really scrambling to try to get back and keep the service that we lost during COVID. And so that's going to be my #1 transportation priority. Second is continuing the 305 improvements up north. And we may need to phase in those improvements differently, but I want to make sure that those commitments are kept. And then thirdly, in the north part of the county, the Kingston State Route 104 ferry terminal mess is just it's a small community and it's a huge problem. So those are the 3 kind of priorities that I see from my end. But I, of course, will be a team player with a Kitsap delegation on the Gorst problem. In terms of local government and making sure there's transportation dollars for local government, we'll do what we need to do. But I think the 3 projects that I just listed as priorities would be considered priorities by you all as well in terms of keeping our community whole. So that's what I have to say about transportation. I'm happy to turn it over to Senator Randall.
Thank you. Glad to have a little respite and yield first pass to you, Madam Chair. When I went to Olympia, I knew that transportation was a huge priority for our community. We are so ferry dependent. In the South, in the Pierce County part of my district, and even for Kitsap folks, we're also really dependent on the Tacoma Narrows Bridge and keeping a handle on toll increases and Gorst. All of us who commute out of Bremerton or through Bremerton or have to get to an appointment have sat in that traffic bottleneck. And I remember when there was that really horrific train crash in Pierce County and traffic was rerouted, through Belfair and through Gorst. We know that keeping our infrastructure strong and working is so important and essential for our district. So I'm proud to sit on the Transportation Committee in the Senate where I can advocate for our community's needs. The transportation budget that we passed this biennium included $41 million of funding in and around the 26th district, including $7.9 million for the upkeep of the Tacoma Narrows Bridge to turn one of the loans into a grant, and also $2.5 million for the Bremerton and Southworth ferry terminals. We know that we have more to do. Like Senator Rolfes says, maintaining our investments in our ferries and rebuilding the infrastructure that has been, on which the maintenance has been deferred for a long time, is really essential. And also continuing to tackle that gorse problem is hugely important to our district in the 26th. And I've been proud to work with Congressman Kilmer and many members on this call on a coalition effort to be ready for injection of federal dollars and the passage of a transportation package, but also to think about what we can do in the immediate future. I will say that there are a couple of transportation packages in the works on the Senate side, and I think Chair Fye is also working on something in the House. There's a package that is focused on green transportation infrastructure, job creation, and investment in our environment and transit that may or may not lean on a public infrastructure bank. We're looking at solutions that are creative. And I know Senator Hobbs is also tweaking and planning to reintroduce his transportation package that I was proud to co-sponsor last year. So I think we'll see movement this year, which is especially important after we had such a conservative budget as we waited for the resolution around Initiative 976 that really hampered our ability to invest as much as we would have liked in community and local projects. So more to come there.
Thank you, Senator Ann. Representative Caldeir, unless you want me to shuffle it up too.
No, that's fine. That's fine. So, when it comes down to fixing the congestion problems that we have, especially for Gorst, I think that that's something where all of us, really have got the same goal in wanting to fix the transportation problems. The hard part is making sure that Kitsap is a priority compared to other, King County projects, and making sure that our projects are actually in the budget. 2 years, I believe it was 2 years ago, right? But the governor had vetoed what the legislature had put in the budget to help fix some of the congestion problems. And we wound up going to court, and we were correct that he was not able to do that. So hopefully what the legislature is able to put in this year will stay in the budget. And the other part, one of the parts of the question was, what to do with the revenue, with declining gas tax revenue. And that is going to be a difficult thing. It's going to be something that I think that some of the proposals that have been put forward that I don't know if the public supports. So I think that the public will support, understands that they need to pay taxes in order to have improvements in the road, and and making sure that we've got our ferries working. And but at the same time, it's always interesting because what one person thinks is fair when it comes to taxes, another person doesn't. So I think these are going to be some ongoing conversations that we have. I don't know if we're going to tackle the tax piece this year. Maybe my colleagues might know something more than I do, but I think that some of the really large fights, they may not happen this year just because of the virtual nature, but never know. And I will continue to work across the aisle and work with all of my colleagues to try to get as many projects in the transportation budget as possible.
Thank you. And lastly, but not least, Representative Hansen.
So the governor's veto that transferred some of the funding, as it turns out, that he could not do, was actually to fund something we all care about, I think, which is our salmon protection. The state of Washington lost a court case against several of our sovereign tribes about as badly as it is possible to lose a court case. And as a result, we are now paying for complying with treaty obligations that we shouldn't have been complying with in the first place. That's not going to go away, and it's going to continue to be expensive, and it is a court order, right? I mean, it's not like we can just say, okay, forget it. We will choose not to comply with the treaty obligations that we've entered into as sovereign nations. So that is going to be out there and going to be ongoing for a while. Other than that, I mean, I share the same three priorities Senator Rolfes articulated. I think with the perspective of the ferries, it is always like total war to try to get the ferries funded. And it's, you know, we do actually all need to pull together. And just from a leverage perspective, it is generally the case that people who vote for budgets, their voices tend to be taken seriously on budgets. People who vote for, so, you know, like that does help us, right? And so we, on the ferries, that has tended to be an area where we tend to have a problem, right? We need everyone to say, if you do the following for ferries, then I'm going to be a good vote on this budget, and that can be helpful. And we've had to exercise our leverage in the opposite direction. I mean, last year, one of the proposals that came out, I think it was Senator Rolfes who first flagged this, was that the ferry riders were being asked to pay something like 80 to 90% of the cost of new boats. And we said, how much do people who use the Alaskan Way Tunnel have to pay for the cost of the new tunnel? That it's not 80 or 90%. Answer, no, it wasn't. And so we pitched a big fit, and we successfully got some of that more equitably shared. That's the same thing we're going to have to continue to do in the future, because otherwise we always are treated unfairly.
Thank you, Drew. Okay, moving on back to the good congressman. Social justice, racial equity, and inclusion. It's on all of our minds, no question. Across Kitsap County, jurisdictions have been having needed and challenging conversations, very productive conversations that I've been involved in. So each of our jurisdictions has a different community makeup, and how we move forward has to reflect our entire community's needs. Questions on the screen. How can the state and federal governments support local jurisdictions in implementing racial justice commitments? Congressman Kilmer.
Thanks for the question, and I appreciate the degree to which these issues around racial injustice have been elevated, not just at the national level, but at all levels of government. I think we need to take a stand and realize we have a lot of work to do as a country. Some of that means just as community partners, we need to hold each other accountable in creating lasting change, and that's needed. At the federal level, the House has passed a bill called the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, which, among other things, creates resources for states and localities looking at things like accreditation, establishing some standards around policing, providing resources for training to prevent the excessive use of force and things like racial profiling. There's a great deal of work that needs to happen outside the criminal justice arena as well. And while there's no single policy that can rectify centuries of systemic racism and everything from housing and education and healthcare, these are issues that demand attention. One of the big areas that I am focused on is making sure that the COVID relief acknowledges the disproportionate impact that Black Americans, Native Americans, and Latino Americans have faced as a consequence of this pandemic. We saw a recent report that Black and Latino populations have been 3 times as likely to become infected, twice as likely to die from the virus as white populations. And we know that Native American communities have also been very significantly disproportionately impacted. So this is one of the areas of, unfortunately, of disagreement in the negotiation between the House and the current administration. I hope it can be resolved. I'm also a sponsor of a standalone bill called the Health Equity and Accountability Act, which focuses on a whole bunch of concrete steps to reduce and eliminate healthcare disparities facing minority communities. That includes everything from data collection to just expanding access to healthcare, improving investments in mental and behavioral health services, and in community health care and community health centers with a specific focus and a target on communities of color. I'll mention just one other thing in the COVID arena. We also found that in the small business assistance, too often Black-owned businesses and minority-owned businesses were not able to take advantage of things like the Paycheck Protection Program. And so in the HEROES Act, there were specific provisions to try to rectify that and to do additional outreach, to provide more of those resources through community-based lenders, because the research showed that entrepreneurs of color were far more likely to get assistance through community-based lenders. And so, obviously there needs to be a comprehensive approach, and part of that means making sure that at every level of government, this is an area of focus. So I really appreciate the spirit of the question.
Thank you, Congressman. Senator Randall.
Thank you. So my grandparents moved to Kitsap County in the 60s because in part they were facing housing discrimination where they lived in Utah. And while they found a much more welcoming community, I also remember being 9 years old and having our house in Sunny Slope vandalized with racist graffiti. And so for my, those are foundational memories for me as a young person, but for my career before and certainly in the legislature, I have spent a lot of energy and effort looking at breaking down barriers so that folks in our community, particularly folks, Black and Brown folks and LGBTQ folks, can find a more welcoming place and can have more access to opportunity, the same access that the rest of our communities enjoy. I've done that work in Olympia in healthcare, sponsoring the bill to create a pathway to universal coverage in our state. We know that our health outcomes prior to the pandemic and certainly now are disproportionately impacting communities of color. That's regardless of coverage, but certainly we have coverage gaps that we need to address. I also have been proud to, as chair of the Higher Education Committee, work with my good friend and chair, Representative Hansen, to remove barriers to college and workforce training so that all folks in our community can open that same door to build the futures that they deserve. We have so much more work to do, and I'm on a work group of the Senate Democratic Caucus to build out equity tools, ways that we can analyze our budget decisions and our policy with an equity lens in a more robust way. And I'm also continuing to do work in the health equity space, bringing back an expansion to postpartum Medicaid that I hope we'll be able to get over the finish line this year to help address some of the disproportionate maternal mortality outcomes in communities of color and in those early childhood moments, so that that young people are not impacted by the ACEs scores that are impactful for them their lifelong. I also have been working with the Washington State Medical Association and other health partners, as well as our med schools, to take a look at continuing education requirements and medical school curriculum that addresses some of these systemic racism and bias in our medical system. It will be much easier under an administration that doesn't, bar federal funding from anyone that is trying to do anti-racism training. So I'm looking forward to continuing to work to, dismantle the parts of our system that are not serving us and to rebuild stronger, healthier, more equitable paths towards futures for all of us.
Thank you, Senator Randall. Michelle Caldeer, Representative Caldeer. I have to look at my list. Now I'm confused with the shuffling. Go ahead, Representative Caldeer.
Well, one of the things that we had almost passed legislation in the past, but it got, it unfortunately did not pass, and that is the body cams and mandating body cams and making sure that there are clear provisions regarding public disclosure, because that was the piece that really got held up. Because I believe that the better transparency that there is, I think that that will alleviate some of the issues that we've seen. One of the other pieces that I'm also working on is some of the racial inequities with foster care. So I'm on a work group that addresses that. Right now we have, unfortunately, more children of color that are removed from the home compared to children from white families with similar reports. So there's already inequities there. And then the other piece is that of the foster homes that are available, unfortunately, there's also inequities there as well. So there's a greater number of families who are white, and that also causes other issues where the children are growing up and may not be able to, I don't think in many cases the state's meeting the cultural needs for these children. So those are some of the things that I'm working on. As we all know, that there's a path from foster care to our prison system. And I believe that if we can address some of the inequities that we have within our foster care system, that will also play a role within the prison system as well. So those are some of the issues that I'm currently working on, and hopefully that we can get the body cam issue addressed. I think that some of the racial inequities have hit the, I think that we've had a lot of light shown on it, and hopefully that will take a priority this year as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. On this last point or last question, Representative Hansen.
Thanks. So the first thing the state can do to help local governments be more equitable or reduce inequities is to do no more harm. So the biggest harm that we would do probably could be by budget cuts. And so let's take the area that Senator Randall and I track the most closely, which is the higher education budget. It would be catastrophic for efforts to have equal opportunity in Kitsap County if we cut community college funding. I mean, Commissioner Wolf knows this because we first met when we were both on the Olympic College Foundation board, and we know how the kind of shoestrings that those institutions operate on. Similarly, probably the biggest equity enhancing investment we've made in the last couple of years was guaranteeing free public college tuition for families making $50,000 a year or less, fully funded by a surcharge on the B&O rates of businesses that make over $1 million a year in services and other income, with Amazon and Microsoft and others paying the highest rate in the whole state. We can't go back on that, not just because Governor Inslee ran for president on it, but because it's actually completely righteous and good policy. And in a world where, look, I mean, intergenerational wealth transfer is not equally distributed, right? I mean, people were deprived of the opportunity to accrue wealth across generations. Equalizing access to college by something like that's a massive equity investment that we have to hold on to. The other area that the state will be particularly active in 2021 relates to police accountability and reform. The state has any number of proposals that are under consideration related to the use of force, related to independent investigations of use of force, related to training of law enforcement and decertification. And I think you're going to see a pretty robust set of legislative initiatives on all of those. And it's a big deal, right? I mean, one thing we've seen in this community is the need for a truly independent investigation of uses of force to make sure people feel comfortable that they're getting the right answers. And candid, truthful answers. I do think I will take slight issue with something that my colleague said about body cams, since I spent several years, as Mayor Erickson may remember, Mayor Erickson, the city of Paulsville, took several years of my life with the body cams issue, where we did eventually address the public records and privacy issues around body cameras, such that if cities want to have body cameras, the public records burden is not going to crush them. And most importantly, we built in a bunch of privacy protections. A lot of people in Bremerton, Pastor Richmond Johnson and others, worked very, very hard on getting those in place so that, what was happening was people would do a public records request for body cams and they throw them up on YouTube. And it's just like voyeurism, right? And that's wrong. And so we wrote some privacy protections into the state law for body camera footage that are now permanent. And I think I think where I came down on the question of whether to use body cams, I don't want to mandate those at the state level. I don't want to mandate those. I don't want to forbid them at the state level, but I think that is a local decision and it's a big decision. And as Bremerton currently has under consideration and knows very well, it's kind of an expensive decision, right? And so, every community gets to make that choice. If that is the right thing they want to spend money on, and that's what the community wants, great, let's do it. But I don't want to mandate that at the state level for any number of reasons. But I mean, I'm delighted to create the framework at the state level that makes it so that if people do want to go down that route, they can do so in a way that protects the public's privacy.
Thank you, Drew. I saved the best for last, Senator Rolfes. Please.
Wow, thanks, Commissioner Wolf. I want to, before Drew goes off the air for a minute, I was hoping that in his comments he would talk about what the House and Senate are working on related to law enforcement reform, because you can explain that the best. Can I cede 20 seconds of my time to Rep. Hansen for that? Because I think you all should know what is being discussed.
No, absolutely. And I mentioned that maybe too briefly. So there are a set of proposals around law enforcement accountability and reform that, let me give you a couple examples. One is the use of force standard. There is a question about whether the use of force standard adequately captures for what the recent indictment in Auburn called an officer-created emergency. That maybe in the instant when force had to be used, it was justified, but how about leading up to that, right? Was the time frame broad enough to make sure that people are taking reasonable steps to de-escalate a situation and not unreasonable ones? That's one. Another one relates to qualified immunity and the standard for suing law enforcement in civil court. There are any number of ways that is made more difficult at the state level that we're looking at pulling back. Another one relates to independent investigations, which I mentioned earlier. Another one, those are three blockbusters. There are literally a dozen more initiatives floating around there. There's a large working group led by our Black Members Caucus in the House, and I believe also led and in coordination with the Members of Color Caucus in the Senate, to figure out what exactly those proposals are going to look like. They're in very, very close touch with the families of people who have lost their lives in officer-involved shootings. And so, I think, look, it's tragic, everything that's gotten us to this point. One blessing is you are likely to see a very, very ambitious, far-reaching law enforcement accountability and reform agenda coming out at the state level, which will set the framework for everything that happens at the local level and enable you locally to say, well, look, look at these steps now that we now have to comply with. This sets a framework for reform and kind of sound and safe policing.
Thank you, Representative Hansen.
Thank you. Drew just knows much more about how to explain that than I do. So thank you for letting me defer to him. And I want to say a few things that weren't covered by the other legislators just to round out the discussion. And one is, I am aware as the budget writer that the state lost a lawsuit to local governments about unfunded mandates using the ballot drop box as an example. So the legislature passed a mandate that there needed to be a certain number of ballot drop boxes spread throughout a community. I think we mandated that they need to be on community college campuses, and the counties needed to provide them on tribal reservations. I don't know, I'm not confident in those exact details, but it was a mandate and it was not funded. And we lost that. And the idea is that we now have to reimburse the counties. I'm not exactly sure for what, whether it's the actual cost of the metal of the box or the cost of maintaining the box. However, we just had a very robust election system that showed the importance of those drop boxes. And it is ludicrous to me that the state should be reimbursing local governments to upend the status quo. And those ballot boxes are an example of In some communities, systemic racism, systemic disenfranchising of voters, and just the maintaining of a status quo. And so when I'm using that as an example of there may be places where you guys need to be dismantling a system, and well, the state can help you, we can get out of the way, or we can mandate that every local government dismantles the status quo the same way. And I haven't bought into the concept that the state has to fund local government to do the right thing. So where you guys are looking at your racial justice commitments, I think it's important for your legislators to know what you're doing and where there may be additional costs, but it's your responsibility to take care of that stuff. So I just want you to be careful about what you're asking us for and what you're expecting the state to be doing when it comes to unfunded mandates. Because that ballot drop box thing really is annoying to me, that you can't provide equal access to voting to all citizens, that you need the state to pay for the county, the local governments to run elections. On a broader scale too, nobody has talked about access to high quality early learning and childcare, but the investment, allowing people to build up intergenerational wealth. I think Drew's right. Higher education is important to that. It's not the only avenue, but it is important to that. But you can't go to college unless you've had a really strong foundation of early learning and childcare. And you need the childcare so parents can go to work and build up assets. So that that need in our communities to make sure that low-income working people have access to childcare, just really key. And where we can be partners with local government and making sure that those businesses survive and those state-funded programs and federally funded early learning programs can continue is going to be key. And then finally, I'm just going to talk a little bit about the public schools. We tend to not have school district people in these meetings, but access to high-speed internet we all can see the problem there. And so when you have low-income families or communities that have been ignored by the telecommunications industry because they're not as profitable as other neighborhoods, it's imperative that the government steps in and helps those families get what they need to keep their kids connected. So from merging broadband and quality education, that's just a key place, not just in our state, but across the country, that America needs to do better, Kitsap needs to do better.
Thank
And
you,
certainly
Wolfies. I just want to break in real quick, Commissioner Wolf, with the last round of questions, if you don't mind us doing a lightning round so we can have time for Q&A at the end. Thank you so much.
We have one more question.
Yes, for this
Yes.
next one, we'll just do a lightning round if that's all right with everyone.
How do you define lightning round in terms of the Zoom production?
60 seconds.
60 seconds is great.
Let's do that. The next subject, thank you, Christine. The next subject demands long-term thinking, period. We all know about our coastlines, and our county is exceedingly vulnerable to sea level rise as a result of climate change. In particular, we've heard quite a bit or some tonight about Gorst is at risk and of sea level rise, and certainly or possibly posing a threat to Naval Base Kitsap and the region's general freight access. And I think Captain Reinhardt's with us tonight from NBK. So however we're defining lightning round, can we do a minute? Let's start with Congressman Kilmer, please.
Okay, I'll try to keep it to a minute. Let me start with the problem statement. As we deal with climate change, as we deal with the threat of tsunami, we simply have to take steps to mitigate some of the threats to public safety and to public access and to cultural landmarks. I really want to tip my hat to Senator Randall and Commissioner Stracklejohn and a whole bunch of the people on this Zoom. Captain Reinhardt, you already called out, and the port and other partners for being part of the Gorst Coalition, which is really a group of public and private partners who are working to ensure that the improvements to SR3 at Gorst actually happen. we're making progress. And the hope here is, I really do think there will be a federal infrastructure package at some point. We need to make sure that when that happens, that project is amplified and elevated enough that Gorst actually gets funded. I mentioned earlier at the federal level, the Moving Forward Act is a big infrastructure bill. We're also, Congressman Heck and I introduced a bill to expand something called the Defense Community Infrastructure Program, which could be helpful to Gorst. We proposed lowering the local cost share for that program and putting more money into it. I'll also just mention one thing to keep an eye on in the lame duck. We have to pass a spending bill. We were able to, I was able to get some additional funding for the Army Corps to help communities that are dealing with flood risks and threats from coastal hazards. We actually increased that funding by 80% in the House bill. That'll get negotiated here in the next couple of weeks. The Trump administration had proposed entirely wiping out all funds for coastal zone management grants and the Coastal Resilience Fund. Not only did we reject that proposal, we increased funding for it. So stay tuned. We're going to keep pushing on that front.
Thank you, Congressman Gilmer. Senator Randall and then Senator Rolfes.
Thank you. So, we've talked already about Gorst, but that is one of the areas where, I'm going to be focusing a lot of energy and attention, both over this next session until we get it across the finish line. Gorst is one example, certainly, of a project that is about building good jobs, keeping our community moving, but also investing in the resiliency of our communities against the climate crisis. I also touched on a couple of transportation packages that are in the works already on the Senate side, and the green transportation package that is being worked on by some of my colleagues also includes pricing carbon and trying to figure out how we can ensure that the folks who are contributing the most to the climate crisis and to polluting our environment are also helping to invest in the resiliency that we need to survive and to allow our communities to thrive. We're going to continue looking at transportation projects in addition to Gorst with an eye towards to salmon recovery and environmental mitigation. We had the chance to go on a transportation tour over the last interim, to look at areas on the Olympic Peninsula that really need investments in maintenance and rebuilding because the maintenance has been deferred for far too long. Roads that are a lifeline to communities on the coast that need us to take action now. And so elevating those projects in our communities that are essential to salmon and are essential to our ability to get from point A to point B is an area where I'll be focusing a lot of attention.
Thank you, Senator Raymond. Senator Rolfes.
So I think the question was lightning round. Is there anything going on about funding to local governments for climate resilience? And I would just reiterate what Senator Randall said in the Senate. We are talking about pollution fines, pollution pricing, carbon pricing, that sort of thing. Something that incentivizes cleaning up the acts of certain industries, as well as raises revenue to protect the citizens of Washington from the climate change that's happening as a result of the pollution.
Thank you, Senator Rolfes. Yeah, the question went to mitigation and adaptation and considering any new funding streams, but you got it. You all did. Thank you. Moving on to Representative Caldeira, and then we will close with Drew Hansen. Representative Hansen.
Oh. Or me?
I think you're up.
Okay, all righty. So one of the things that I'd like to see is a little bit better accountability for when there is sewage that is being spilled into our beautiful Puget Sound. We have just seen sewage spill after sewage spill after sewage spill. I think that as a state, we should help with some of the infrastructure for, especially for King County, because that seems to be the area of the largest problem. But that is something that I am very passionate about, is preventing the raw sewage from being dumped into our beautiful waters. And I'm very grateful that Suquamish, I believe it's Suquamish tribe, did a recent lawsuit for that, and hopefully can start shedding some light on this problem. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Michelle. Representative Hansen.
So if the question is new funding streams to help local governments, once more, that is a federal issue, if at all. And, you know, no one asked me, but if I were the United States and the world's creditors were willing to lend me money at interest rates that were basically zero, in fact, they're negative now in real terms, and I could take that money and I could make one-time investments in renewable energy and other climate change mitigation so that the plant doesn't cook and we don't all die, I would do that tomorrow. I mean, I would do that, and that goes, I don't know what exactly is in the current Green New Deal, but that's what the Green New Deal is, right? I mean, the Green New Deal is we're going to borrow a bunch of money, make a bunch of one-time investments in renewable energy so we don't all die. I mean, that I think is completely good sense with interest rates the way they are now, because the world's creditors have apparently a bottomless appetite for lending the United States money. At the state level, I think the shift to the balance of power in the Senate gives us maybe some more opportunities on stuff like clean fuels than we've done before. But this is one where we really need to have Senator Rolfes's caution in mind about doing things that the public is going to uphold. There was a carbon fee initiative, you all may remember, in 2018. It was one I supported. It lost bad. It lost by like 20. Okay, so like, you know, like we need to think real carefully about all the things that we vote for to make sure that we can hold them, which is, you know, another reason I like the idea that at the federal level we should borrow money and invest into renewables and create a bunch of jobs in the process at a time when God knows this economy needs them.
Thank you, Drew. That concludes the questions, but I think, again, with the chairman's prerogative, before I get the hook here, I'll never have the opportunity again probably to give Leonard Forsman the last word. Leonard, would you like to comment on anything you've heard tonight?
Well, I think that we have a robust discussion, a Washingtonian tradition based on the traditions of the first peoples of this land. I appreciate everybody recognizing some of the same values that the tribe has. I think that as far as climate change is concerned, it's something that we've been working on forever, because we need to restore and promote and take care of our natural resources, our treaty resources that benefit everybody. And I think everybody agrees on that. It's just getting there. On the issues regarding unrest and racial injustice, I think that we really need to really look inward on that and really think about tolerance. And that's not just tolerance for race, but it's also tolerance for religion and different ways of looking at the world. But I think this have to be based in truth, and that's all we ask for, facts. And so I really think that there's a lot of ways we can address that. On the issues regarding, you know, funding, I think that, especially in transportation, I was involved with the initiative on the carbon fee. We couldn't call it a tax. You can only call it a fee, right? Just because of the optics, but it technically was looked on as a tax, as Drew has mentioned. I think the main problem with that was just the fact that people didn't know what they were getting. And so I think we just have to look at when we say we were going to charge these fees or taxes or whatever on polluters or on the oil industry or on other industries, that we know that the people know what they're going to get. So there's not every clear as possible. A lot of those projects, I'm co-chair of the West Central LIO, and a lot of people on this call or on that group actually were called the West Sound Partners for Ecosystem Recovery. We got a long list of projects that need funding, and they're restoring beaches in Bremerton working on creeks in central Kitsap and, removing bulkheads and restoring nearshore environment. It's all there. It's all been vetted. It just needs the money. So those are places that we can get these things done. We just need to brand them right and move forward. So thanks for the opportunity, Commissioner Wolf. Good to see you again. Good to see
Well,
everybody.
good. I'm getting the hook, not you. I'm getting the hook. So I don't have and we're about out of time. I don't have a closing statement or closing remarks, but in my opinion tonight, Zoom did not minimize the passion, the thrust, and the urgency of our issues in Kitsap County. I'm actually surprised to say that, but I didn't see minimization at all. I want to thank the panel for your commitment to these issues. Do we agree on all of them? Probably not. Are we going to continue working together? Yes. Now, I don't know if I'm supposed to close this out now or just say goodnight and go have dinner, or what are we doing right now, Sophie?
That's about right. Just thank everyone for their time, especially the legislators and Congressman Kilmer, as well as the great participation by everyone.
Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Commissioner Wolf,
Yes.
can I just jump in here a little bit? I
Because
just
you're
wanted
the vice
to
chair next year of this group, I'm going to allow you to jump in.
thank you. I just wanted to take this opportunity while she was not a part of the barrage of questions this evening, wanted to thank Representative Appleton
Thank
for her
you.
years of service to the 23rd LD,
Yeah.
and knowing that she has served us greatly, and definitely want to appreciate her for everything that she's done for us.
Thank you, Sherry.
Thank you, Sherry.
Thank you
Anyone?
all. That was very sweet. Are we
Okay, folks,
here?
if there's nothing else for the good of the order, we'll go have dinner and a glass of wine or something.
Martini.
Okay.
Sorry.
Good night. Thank you all.
Good night. Okay, how do I leave this meeting? Usually it says leave the meeting, doesn't it?
On the bottom right-hand corner, Representative Appleton, you should see something that says end or leave.
I got it. Thank you. You can tell I'm not technically proficient here.
And every platform is different, so it's not you.
Thank you.
I think I'm going to end the meeting for everyone. It looks like most people have exited, but thank you all for hanging on and having a long evening with us. Take care, everyone.
Good night.